so we're starting a new page today and a new topic. So we have done the graphs topic before, but this is a separate part of it that we're doing because it's very different from the graphs we did before. All right, so what we're doing is proportion or variation. And these things are really, really badly done in exams if you do not practice these questions. Okay, so expect to get 0 unless you're going to practice it. All right, so we're starting off with direct proportion, and then next lesson we're going to do indirect or inverse proportion. So with direct proportion, two things or two measurements or two quantities are in direct proportion if, when one of those things increases, the other thing increases. All right, so the same thing is happening. So for instance, we could look at the two things being the amount of hours spent on schoolwork and the other thing being exam mark. So for maths, the amount of hours spent on schoolwork, the more you do of those, if you increase the amount of hours spent on your schoolwork, your exam mark will increase as well. Okay, so we would say that those two things are in direct proportion. Okay, so looking at wording in questions, they can be a little bit confusing in how they word things. So they could be using the words is directly proportional to. Okay, so we might be looking at the speed of a car and how far you go. All right, so the speed of the car and the distance that it travels. So the higher the speed of the car, the higher the distance you will travel. They are in direct proportion. So they might say speed is directly proportional to the distance travelled. Okay, the other words they might use are varies directly. So they might say speed varies directly as distance. Okay, so don't worry too much about it. If you see the word directly, you'll know it's one of these questions. If you see, sometimes I'll leave the word directly out altogether. So if you see the word proportional or varies, you also know that you're doing one of these questions. Okay, so there is a procedure involved here. So what I'm going to do at the moment is go through the procedure, and it won't mean a lot till we do some examples in the next video. Okay, so the procedure is we're going to write a variation equation. Now, this is not the actual answer to the question, write the variation equation, but it gets us started. So we write down an equation or a proportion equation, whatever they decide to call it, and it'll look like this, right? So the y and the x are the two things we're talking about. Okay, so if we're talking about speed and distance being in direct proportion, we might have S equals KD. Right, so S is for speed, D for distance, so we might write S equals KD. In this case, we're just writing Y equals KX, but the two things would be going in for the Y and the X. As I said, when we practice these with examples, it will be much clearer. All right, so then you're going to use two given values of X and Y, an X value and a Y value that go together, to put them in these two positions. And that will leave you with one thing you don't know, and that's K. So then you're going to find K. You solve that little equation and you'll find K. The K is called the constant of proportionality. All right, so in some questions they'll say, find the constant of proportionality. They mean we want you to find that K value. So you'll do it by starting with this and then putting the two things in for X and Y and finding your K out. After that, we then get that K value and we put it in here. So let's just say K equals 3. Well, it'd go in there and we would end up with Y equals 3x. If K ended up being a half, we would have Y equals a half x. So after you've done that and put that K number in, you now have a variation equation. So when they say find the variation equation, that's what they want to know. All right, they want a number in there for K. And then after you've done that, you've actually created a formula now. Every other question they ask after that, you're going to use that formula. whatever it is, y equals a quarter x, y equals minus 0.07x, whatever it is, that's the formula you're going to use to answer every other question they ask. Okay, so in the next video, we'll come back and do some examples on this.